I'm sure most of you will already know who I am. I've been coming to Walton Baptist Church with my mum and my sister since I was born. I was dedicated here as a baby and I went to the various Sunday school groups here until I was a teenager. I was quite well versed in my Bible, but I don't think I'd ever really felt anything on a spiritual level or considered a relationship with God until I went away with the church on a family holiday to Sussex. One night we were asked if anyone wanted to come forward for prayer, and as two of my friends suddenly got up, I didn't want to feel left out, so I went with them. I probably wasn't sure what I was doing, but at that moment I really felt the most amazing sense of peace, and I knew that I wanted to follow Jesus. I was so excited when I got back to my room that I wrote the words in my Gideon's Army New Testament Bible, made commitment to God, 12th of April 1992. So that's when it was. I felt great when I came home. I was really fired up, and for a few years I was really focused on my faith. But like a lot of people, unfortunately I turned into a bit of a cynical and moody teenager. I was never a very confident person, and when I went to college at the age of 16, I stopped going to church and I started drinking as a way of being accepted and making friends. In 1999 I went off to university, which ended up being a bit of a disaster for me. I was living above a pet shop in a pretty grim part of Bristol, doing a course that was only 8 hours a week, so I was going out of my mind with boredom. I ended up watching Neighbours and Home and Away twice a day, and worryingly I started getting into all the other soaps like EastEnders and Emmerdale Farm as it then was, and even Brookside. I couldn't find any time for studying, but when I wasn't watching rubbish on the telly, I went out drinking heavily for about 5 nights a week. Quite often I was blacking out, I couldn't remember getting in. And when I sobered up in the morning, I just felt miserable and homesick. So I took the decision just before the end of the term to come home and try and get a job. This was a very painful time. I was depressed and embarrassed about the way things had turned out, and I remember feeling incredibly low when I did my first shift back at my old job in WH Smith's. Thankfully it didn't take too long to get my career started, although it was never my dream to become an accountant. So I managed to start working and put a lot of this behind me. Unfortunately I didn't want to give up on my social life though, so somewhat misguidedly I thought it was a good idea to carry on drinking at the weekends. And to be honest, this went on for a very long time. While I was getting habitually drunk every week, I wasn't able to see the impact it was having on me or my family. I would struggle into work after a heavy weekend, feeling absolutely shattered and drained for most of the week. But by around Thursday I'd be starting to feel better again, but by that time it was time to start doing it all over again, and another 3 nights of drinking would start. By my mid-20s I got to the point where I really wanted to stop it all, but having a night in just wasn't socially acceptable to my friends. And having the courage to break that cycle and say that you want to do something different with your life is incredibly hard. So I ended up just taking the easy option and carried on with all the nights out, hoping something would change somehow, but not knowing what to do with myself. I never stopped believing in God for all these years, but I just thought that I could somehow go off and do my own thing and pray a bit when I needed help, or rattle off a shopping list to God. The idea of actually going to church or even reading my Bible just seemed a bit excessive to me, to be honest. I was eventually persuaded by a friend to attend the Alpha course that WBC were running in the autumn of 2007. Initially, I really didn't want to be there. I was still spending a lot of time in the pub at weekends, so I'd be turning up to the meetings feeling tired and not wanting to talk to anyone. And to make matters worse, it seemed like somebody had cooked a fish pie for dinner every week. But I managed to get over that, and as the weeks went by, I began to reflect a bit more and listen. I started to pray more again, and I think I even read my Bible once or twice, so things were definitely heading in the right direction. By the end of 2007, a few things happened, and I just felt I'd had enough of the life I'd been living. Things came to a bit of a head when I went out drinking all day on a Friday at the office Christmas lunch. I felt terrible for most of the next day, but I managed to force down a couple of pints and I thought I was going to get through the hangover. I'd started doing Vision Theatre drama sketches again by this stage, and we had to do one the next Sunday morning in church. When I got back home, I started to get really nervous about it and I couldn't switch off. I barely slept that night, and By the time I got to church in the morning, I was an absolute bundle of nerves. But people must have been praying for us though, because it actually seemed to go really well. But by the time I got home, I was just emotionally exhausted. From that point, I really wanted to stop it all and just try and start coming back to church. I remember really struggling at first. One minute I was sitting around in the pub drinking beer and talking about football with my mates, and the next I was sitting in someone's front room in a house group drinking tea and talking about the Bible. It freaked me out, if I'm honest, and I felt very insecure talking to other Christians. I think I felt I'd look stupid if I didn't know my Bible as well as them, so I ended up being quite withdrawn and going into myself. When you've spent such a long time drinking, and I suppose avoiding facing up to life, it can be a really hard time. The thing that you were relying on for your self-confidence isn't there anymore, and you realise that all it was doing was just suppressing your feelings and stunting your development as a person. But it was great to be back at WBC, although looking back I still wasn't quite prepared to abandon my old lifestyle. I didn't want to consciously say that I wasn't going to do those things again. Perhaps I didn't trust myself not to break a promise to God, or maybe I thought I could justify the odd heavy night out. But whatever it was, I made my excuses and ended up slipping up a fair few times. This made me feel worse than ever before, both physically and mentally. And whilst I knew what the right path was, I still couldn't quite stay on it. Tragically, one of my closest friends died in a fire in 2013 when he set light to his bed with a cigarette after a night out drinking. I know my friend really wanted to try and live his life without alcohol, but he just didn't know how to do it. And when I reflected on the conversations we'd had in the couple of years before he died, and thought about the second chance that I had to live differently, I knew that it all had to stop. Life is genuinely so much better now. You'll see me here most Sundays, and I'm really working on my faith. I may not be the most expressive Christian you'll ever meet, but it's amazing to know that despite all my wanderings and disobedience, God never gave up on me, and there is forgiveness. It's been a very long road to get to this point, and I know I should have done this many years ago, but it's great to have this opportunity today to turn away from the past, be baptised, and start the next stage of my Christian life.